So are you looking for some new mediums to mix up your collage in your art journal? Today I want to share with you how you can use acetate and tissue paper to create beautiful, unique layers in your art journal pages. So let's get started. So let's first talk about some of the materials we'll be using today. I have some printed acetate. So this one has some gold in them. It's a little bit hard to see on camera here, but I also have ones that have been printed on black. You can also use just plain acetate and stamp on it. You can also just use anything that you have. If you'd like me to go a little bit more into different ways you can color or change acetate, let me know in the comments below. I'd be more than happy to share a video with you about that. But today I'm just going to use the printed acetate that I already have on hand. And I'm also going to be using a variety of tissue paper. I have some tissue papers that I've jelly printed, and if you're interested in that video, you can see it in the comments below. I also have another tissue paper video that I did about how you can alter tissue paper in a lot of different ways. So this is some of the samples from those videos, and you can even add things like medium on it. And if you're curious about that, again, check out the video in the description below. But these are some of the materials I'll be incorporating into today's collage. Because we're going to be using more transparent layers like tissue paper and acetate, I wanted to start with a little bit of book paper. And that's one way that I like to just kind of mix things up a little bit. When you add book paper, it adds a little bit of texture, adds a little bit of this more creamy color to it, but it doesn't take over from the other images that you're going to be adding. So I'm just going to be ripping this up and just adding in sections onto my page. You'll find that some of this will rip easier in one direction than another. I like just trying to get rid of some of the edges to this. I don't like having any harsh edges on my collage. And if you've been following me a while, you know how much I love Liquitex matte medium. It's one of my favorite mediums that I like to use. And again, like with every other collage that I do, you want to add some to the surface, you want to add some to the back of the paper. You want to adhere them together, and sometimes they'll curl like that, and that's okay. And you can decide if you want your words completely straight or not. It just kind of depends. And you can decide if you want any wrinkles in there. You can purposely add in wrinkles if that's the look you're going for, or you can have it be extremely smooth. It really comes down to your personal preference and what you like. And matte medium generally works fairly well. I find that if you're putting on super heavy, like 140-pound paper, then you're going to want to move up to a gel medium. But most of the time, the matte medium for most of the collage materials that we're using will get the job done and get the job done well. Add all of the book paper in just to, again, have a little bit of a layer. Again, a lot of this is going to be covered up, but areas are going to peek through. You're going to be able to see a little bit of that writing. It's a really nice way to start, just to add a little bit more interest to the page. You could always start with a little bit of color or a little bit of your own writing. There's lots of things you can do to add that first layer. Because we're using acetate and tissue paper, some of it's going to be semi-transparent, so it's nice to have something underneath that kind of peeks through. And we don't want to cover the whole surface. I'm just covering a few areas here and there. And you do want to let this dry before you move on. So usually what I like to do at this point is if you are going to be drawing things, what I like to do is actually put my brush in a baby wipe. That just kind of keeps it moist, so it doesn't dry out as I'm drawing other surfaces. I've added book paper, I've cut around the edges, I've let it dry. That just gives us a really good sense of where our borders are. And now we can go in and add some more tissue paper. So this is the tissue paper that I made. And if you're interested about how to make these tissue papers, check out my tissue paper video. I have the link below. And that's a really fun way of just making your own custom tissue paper. When you're adding in tissue paper, again, always remember, add a little bit to your surface. And then what you want to do is just add it on top. You don't want to be trying to add too much medium to the back of the tissue paper. What I find is that it will rip. So by just being a little bit more gentle and just adding it on top and then adding some medium through, that's a great way of being able to just have it work really well for you. And then even on this one, I have a couple of the layers bending over each other, and that's great too. But you can see that on the areas where I have the book paper, that book paper is peeking through. And so the areas with more color, there's a little less of it peeking through, and the areas that are a little bit more translucent, you can see more of it. And that's the beauty of tissue paper, is it just gives you a lot of options for letting colors peek through and then having other colors fall to the background. And I'm creating a lot of texture here. I'm purposely creating more texture on the surface than maybe you're used to seeing. I actually don't mind that it's wrinkling and doing its thing. I really like the extra texture. And I like the subtlety of it because now we're not looking at putting on some super opaque layers. We're going to be building layer on layer of tissues and mediums. And then this is where we can also bring in some of these ones that have more opaque designs on them that we can also mix into this. And I love how some of this stuff reminds me of like a bit of a turtle or like the idea of maybe dragon scales. I love the different colors. I ended up getting some browns and some deeper hues in here. And I think it's just a great place to start with this page because I love the different color combinations. And this is where the fun starts in. Like I don't really have a really strong plan for this. I have an idea for the journaling for it. This is one where I had the journaling thoughts in place and then thought, well, I'll add in some paper and see where this goes. So let's start adding in a little bit of pattern. So I have pattern from this one and I also have pattern from this one. So I am definitely sticking with more of the pinks. I want that pattern to be seen, but I don't want it to take over too much. And the good thing about the tissue paper is anywhere where you don't put the matte medium down, once it's dry, you can tear it and it'll come off easily. So that's one positive thing about it is then you don't have to worry about if it's overlapping somewhere, you don't have to worry too much. And again, I would be a little bit careful when you're working on the tissue paper, not to press too hard, just because sometimes I would actually suggest if you're new to this and you tend to use a lot of medium, dry these layers in between, but because I'm going fairly gentle and I kind of know how to use this medium quite well, that's why I'm putting layer on layer. And sometimes they can tear if you put too much pressure on them. So it's something to be aware of as you're creating, not to go too heavy-handed with things because you can do some damage to your project because they're quite delicate layers. But if you worked in a delicate manner, then it's not usually a big issue. You'll notice any areas with white, once you add the tissue paper on top, those white areas pretty much disappear. So that's kind of the beauty of tissue paper is that you don't have to worry about the background white showing up. Instead, it's just basically going to disappear onto the page. And so I'm pretty happy with that so far. I want to let this layer dry. And then I'm going to continue to come and add more layers. And so before I add 2 more layers, I want to talk about my focal image. So again, I'm using some images I got from Simply Stated Designs. Sometimes I love just even photocopying my own art and doing this, but they had some really unique pieces and I wanted to use them in my page. So I'm just trying to decide which of these books that I want to use because I was thinking that my focus was going to be talking about telling your story. So I kind of like these two. I find these ones are a little bit more dynamic. I really like this one. I'm just wondering if this will be too late for the page. So I'm going to play around with this background as we go on and keep this image in mind. So maybe I'll stick with this one because I really like this one. And as I add the acetate and some of these other layers, this way I can try to keep this focal image in mind as I work. And so these gold ones are very subtle, but that does add a little bit of shine, adds a little bit of variation. I also have some smaller pieces like this that could be added as well. And these could also be overlapped and they could be, and other mediums could be added on top. So I need to think through what I'm looking to do for design and what I want this to look like. And this is where some of these pieces like this can be really nice for putting behind. And that can just help the image pop a little bit. Or you can take areas like this and just have a strip along here just to add, again, a little bit more interest. So I'm going to play around with this a little bit. So playing around with a little bit of placement. I'm not done with my tissue paper layers, but I want to add a couple of these layers down. So instead of using matte medium to adhere this, I'm using white glue. And the main reason I'm using the white glue is because this will dry clear and it won't make the acetate cloudy. So there's a few of these layers that I want to add in later, but the 2 that I want to add in right now are these 2 here. And I'm just adding some to the back. You might go, wow, that's going to dry really obvious. It won't actually. It's going to dry completely clear. And I tend not to go all the way to the edges with this because by the time you put it down and you just squish it around, it's going to squish out to the edges. And so I wouldn't leave the huge beads of color there. What I would do is I would squish it like that. And that just helps it stay on the surface. The gold ones are meant to be quite subtle. They're almost a little subtle for this page, but I wanted a few subtle layers to this, which is why I'm choosing to use it. And then I'm using my acetate here, and I'm just, again, pushing it down. And I think I want it close to the bottom of the page there. And again, same thing. I'm squishing it and I'm moving it. And now you're noticing that you can barely see it even though it's not even dry yet. So when it's fully dry, you're not going to see it at all. And that's just a really great way of just adhering this. And unlike what I usually use with some of the mediums, I'm not adding a layer on top. And so these two layers here, I wanted the idea of having some acetate and this coming behind because that's going to help pull this from the background a little bit. But before I do that, I want to start adding in some other layers of tissue paper. So what I've done here, and I've showed this in my tissue paper video, is I've added mediums to tissue paper. And that might seem like a strange thing to do, but it works nice, especially if you do not like to wait. The nice thing about the tissue paper is you can just add it and then just dry it quickly, and it's set. You don't have to worry about the waiting time of adding these images. If you're worried about accidentally making a mess of your project by adding in some mediums, this is another great way of just adding mediums without worrying about them wrecking your page if you are worried about that. And so again, I'm just ripping this, and I'm going to be adding this in a few places. I haven't quite decided where yet. I feel like we have some stuff going on here, but I feel like we need to have a little bit of tissue paper over top of it. And I like to remove a lot of the edges just because I find that it works a little bit better for this. So instead of having two really harsh layers of acetate, now what we're doing is just adding in some other textures on top. And again, what's nice about this is it's not going to cover up everything below. You'll find that using the matte medium with the shiny stuff, it is going to go a little bit more matte. That's just the reality of it. You could use a gloss medium, but I find with gloss mediums, they often make my pages and my art journal stick together, which is why I am using the matte medium today. But I probably should get a gloss medium for stuff like this, just so that we don't lose all of the shine there. And you can also try to remove a little bit of it off the surface. But you can actually see now I have a line there. And that was something I wasn't thinking about, is that because we have the ripped tissue paper there and the acetate is clear, we are going to get a little bit of a line. But that's okay. We can look at adding in other mediums on top. And this is where the layering can get really, really fun, because again, you can just look at adding another layer and adding another layer and adjusting as you go. I didn't have a really good, strong idea for this. All I had was the idea that I wanted to use some of these mediums I hadn't used in a while and talk a little bit about sharing your story. I've recently started teaching at a non-for-profit for people who are experiencing the cancer journey. And one thing I found about the whole experience is how, not only how rewarding it's been, but just how amazing the people that I'm working with are. I've really realized the importance of community and the importance of sharing your story, because you don't know what people are going through or how your story can help them. And it's been something I've really seen just through that experience, where being able to show people art techniques and having them to have an opportunity to do something creative that maybe just helps them even for a few hours, not have to think about some of the other parts of their lives that they're having to deal with. Watching people go through really hard things and share their story with so much optimism and resilience and strength. I have been so amazed by the beautiful people that I've met and just their honesty and the beauty that they can share even though they're going through something that's really, really difficult. And it really reminded me about sharing your story. I found that even I share my story. I've never been through the cancer experience, but just going through burnout, deciding to move into art, how art heals us, and going through that entire process and how much it's helped encourage others as well as encouraging me, because I'm having an opportunity to say something that just helps somebody else. And so sometimes we don't know the impact we're going to have. We don't know what people around us might be struggling with, and that by listening and by understanding maybe where they're coming from, you could be that shining light in their lives and give them something to think about. And I think about some of the people I have spoken to, not just people dealing with cancer, but just in general. And I find when people share their stories of what they're experiencing, the things that they're learning in their lives, how much that also helps me. And so at this point, I was going to add in my book and then start looking at adding in my journaling and other things. But I realized that I feel like this is still falling a little bit to the background. So I'm going to try something a little bit different. I found the Spellbinders paper art, like Happy Skies Silk, It looks like some sort of watercolor medium, but I don't think it's a rewettable watercolor. So it's going to be more of like a pigment ink that's going to set when done. But I'm going to try this on the background and see what I can do to just add a little bit more color just to help this page just pop a little bit more. Oh, it even has a little application thingy. So I'm just going to add it. Ooh, look at that color. I'm just going to add to the surface. And so what I'm going to do is come in with a brush and a little bit of water. We're going to see what we can do with this. Because now that we've actually sealed all these layers with matte medium, this is an opportunity for us to go in and now we can pull color out. We can catch some of those high points, and then now that can even do something else. And then you can also do it on top of the acetate. That will work as well. You can even add it on top of the blue. And this is almost where I would come with the baby wipe and just, ooh, that moved. This is where I would come with the baby wipe because I don't want it to look so brush marky. I just kind of want to pull it out and see what's going to happen. Look at that on that gold. That looks really, really cool. But you can see that was just a couple little drops like that. Like, it's not much. I think that's the reason they give you the brush, is because I think it goes on a lot stronger than you might think. It's not fully dry, but let's just kind of hang this guy over top and see what this looks like. Yeah, so I feel like that helps. That helps a lot, actually. So I'm going to even move in with a little bit more. I don't want to take away from what I've done so far, but sometimes you just need to put in some of those paints, those inks, just to add in this a little bit more contrast, just to help things pop a little bit more. And because of the acetate underneath as well too, that's going to create some really interesting effects. But I do want some of that area underneath there quite dark. And that one actually has some shimmer in it as well. It shows, you can see all of the metallic underneath. I don't know if I got that much of it, but I think it looks really good. And my understanding of this medium is that it will dry permanent, so I don't have to worry about pulling it up when I'm adding in more matte medium. So now that this is dry, and you want to make sure that you don't dry it with any heat. I did, and I have a little section here that curled. You have to be very, very careful. The acetate will definitely melt and warp and buckle, so just be really aware of that when you're looking to add things. So I'm going to be adding in this last piece of acetate because I want this one just to really pop on top. And again, by adding in that blue, we've now added in some really nice color that's really helped the rest of the imagery pop a little bit more. And again, it's important to have areas that are darker and some areas that are lighter, so you have a spot that really brings your eye up the page. And just before I put that down permanently, I just want to see where that's going to fall. And I'm really happy with that. If you find that you don't like where it is, you can always slide it and move it. And again, you can see with some of the other pieces that have already dried, you don't see any of the glue through. So we're just going to squish it and move it, and that's just going to help that dry really quickly. And it's going to want to slide as you work, so something to be aware of as you work. And then I had a little bit of glue come out around the edge there. And I'm finding this is sliding a lot, but that's okay. It's going to be fine once it dries. The key with this is patience. It looks a little bit messy now, but it's going to look gorgeous once it's dry. And we can pop this up, but I generally don't like popping up things too much in my art journal just because I already have a fair amount of thickness going on. If I add too much thickness, then unfortunately things don't stick as well. If you're interested in these images, check out Simply Stated Design. It's actually an Alberta-based company here in Canada, and she does some very beautiful imagery. And it's just a fun way of just adding focal images onto your art journal pages without having to put too much work into it. And I'm bringing this way. I want this to fall into the rule of thirds. And if you haven't heard of the rule of thirds, check out my video about composition where I talk about some general things to be aware of when you're working in an art journal and in any creative piece that can help you. I talk about it more from a drawing perspective, but really it applies to anything that you'll do in your art journal. And the rule of thirds just kind of keeps that in this nice spot here. It kind of draws your eye in, and it works really, really well. And I really wanted to do the book because I liked the idea of a story and the idea of sharing your story. And with this one here, I'm actually just going to add in a little bit of glue to the back here. I'm going to be treating this a little bit differently than the other collage. I just need to make sure I have lots of glue so it sticks to the edges. And this is where matte medium works a little bit better because you don't have to worry about having any edges that stick up. And in this case, I had to use quite a bit of glue, but just for this last piece, I didn't really want to move back to my brush. And so that, again, brings that over because now we don't have any really harsh edges sticking out. Everything feels like it's kind of put together and in layers and part of the same project. So the last thing I'm going to do is add in my words, which is share your story, because that's what we've been kind of talking about today, about the importance of your story and just how it can affect others. So what I've done here is I've taken some gridded acetate, added some StazOn ink, and stamped on my images. And if you'd like to see a video that's specifically about how to decorate or change acetate, let me know. I'm more than happy to film something if that's something that interests you. And so I want to tuck that in behind. And I go, of course, this will look a lot better once it's dry. And so basically when you are stamping with StazOn ink, and the nice thing about StazOn is it will work on any surface, which is perfect for something like acetate that doesn't dry easily. And I like that because it's nice and stiff. It kind of stays on top. It gives it almost like a sense of floating on your surface. And it adds shine as well, right? But at the same time, because I can just basically put them on with little squares and not have to worry about it being perfect, it doesn't matter because, again, it blends a little bit more into the background. But again, it adds a little bit of shine and interest to it. And then this is where you can add it on top of these really textured areas and have it sit on top. And also, you don't have to worry about trying to fussy cut out things. I really like acetate for just the ease of use. And I might go in and add in a little bit more journaling afterwards. Sometimes we'll go in after these videos and add in a few little comments about some of the things I've been learning about sharing your story. So I hope you've enjoyed this project and that this has given you some ideas on how you can use acetate and tissue paper in your creative practice. We often think about paper when we're thinking about collage, but it's definitely not the only medium that you can use. And if you've enjoyed this video, if you could like it, subscribe, and hit that notification button so you don't miss out on any future videos. And I'd love to know what you thought about this video and even about the idea of sharing your story. Do you have a story that you'd like to share with me about ways that you've shared your story that's helped others? I would love to start a conversation with you, and I would love to see your comments. So if you're looking for another video about how to use tissue paper in your art journal, click here. This is one I did a little while back about how to use tissue paper and paste in your art journal. So I'll see you in that next video.